Welcome to Ants of Sydney. So, last time on this channel, I showed you my new ants who were exploring their ant world. They're still doing so today I'll be explaining to you some of the science behind ants, including reproduction, movement, digestion, and colony structure, as well as many other fun facts. Stick around for some interesting facts about ants, and maybe even learn how to grow your own colony if you're interested. I'll start with the colony hierarchy. So at the top of the hierarchy in a gnat colony is the queen. Queens mate with drones, however drones are only alive usually for 1 to 2 months, but I'll get into the reproductive system later. The queen will produce workers who sit at the bottom of the hierarchy. In some genera, like the big-headed ant, there will be different castes of workers, like major and minor workers. A minor worker will collect food and feed the queen, as well as transport eggs and larvae throughout the nest, whereas major workers will defend the colony and defend food trails. In some species, most recognizably Gamergate ants, they will not have a queen, but instead have a reproductive worker, and other ants can lay eggs, but I've seen where the eggs will be killed. Now I'll be talking about the digestive system. The first part is the pharynx, but unlike us, they don't actually have a mouth. So at the front of the pharynx is just a hole, not an actual mouth. Then the esophagus comes in. Very much like our esophagus, it goes down to the stomachs, but only liquids can get through, which is why you should feed your ants mostly liquid foods. Jello is what you should use for protein sources, and you should be using stuff like honey, syrups, or ant juice for their sugary food. You will see ants bringing back more whole foods like grains, pieces of apple, or pieces of bread to their nest, but that's generally for the larvae. Now, time to get into the stomachs. Yep, stomachs. Plural. Ants have multiple stomachs. The first one is the crop, which is also referred to as the social stomach. This one is used to store food to give it back to their sisters closer to the nest through a process called oral trophallaxis, which is essentially just vomiting up the nutrients into the pharynx of another ant. No digestion takes place here. It's just a storage area. As I said, ants can bring up food from the crop and into the pharynx, oral trophallaxis, as it's called. Now into the second stomach. This is where the liquid food gets digested into nutrients, similar to us. They use the sugar from all their foods to power their muscles and do everything in their lives. They don't have a pancreas or liver to help with digestion. Now I'll talk about the ant life cycle and Now I'll talk about the ant life cycle and reproductive systems in ants. So, in an ant, the queen is the main egg layer, with some exceptions with gamergates as stated earlier. But the queen, in most species, I'm not going to talk about gamergates anymore, the queen will lay eggs. These eggs will develop into larvae, which just look like fat worms, and the larvae will then develop into a pupa. Pupas look like ants, but don't have the movement characteristics and aren't fully developed yet. Now, a pupa will develop into one of three things. The first and most common being adult workers. If you didn't know, all workers are female, and males are a second option. Less common, but still more common than the third option, are male drones. These will only live for 1 to 2 months, and in that time, their sole goal is to reproduce with a queen. And queens, if you haven't guessed already, are the third option. The rarest of all, queens only spawn at specific times. However, in the world, an ant species will always be reproducing. As an example, I'm based in Sydney. Someone in America could see ants reproducing when I'm not seeing ants reproducing in my area, but later I might be seeing ants reproducing and they won't be. Ants typically reproduce during either spring or summer. They don't like the cold for reproduction. Ants will reproduce in large masses, so these are known as nuptial flights, where the male drones, that is, and the queens will fly up and reproduce with each other. The male will inject the queen with sperm, then the queen will fly to the ground and find a nest for herself. First workers are fed from the queen's wing muscles, as she doesn't need them after shedding her wings. That's about it for the reproductive system. But now it's time for movement. Ants have relatively basic movement. They're 6 legs, as typical with all insects, and aren't the fastest, aren't the slowest. However, there are many different species, if you haven't noticed, and these can range from slow with big heads to block entrances like turtle ants. These guys aren't the fastest. To jumping ants, which can jump like up to 30 centimeters or more. So locomotion varies significantly from ant to ant. Now, the last thing I'm going to talk about today is ants' senses. Now, like all living things, ants have the 5 senses of touch, taste, smell, hearing, and sight. But one in particular sense in ants is used significantly more than the rest, and that is smell. Now, if you didn't know, ants smell with their antennae, which you'll often see them cleaning, because if the ants don't clean their antennae, it's like us being blind. Their main sense is significantly reduced. The reason ants use smell so much is because of a thing called pheromones. Pheromones are left by workers so that other ants can find food, places to attack, or the nest, along with many other things. Ants do rely on other senses a bit, like sight. They'll use sight to look for landmarks if they're following a food trail, and they'll use sight to identify the nests sometimes. But the main sense is smell. Some species of ants have better sight than others, and some species don't have sight at all. As an example, ant species like Melissa tarsus, who live completely indoors, inside rotting logs, and barely go outside, don't have very well developed eyes, if they have any at all. On the other hand, though, are Gigantiops destructor, which have the most oculi, which are smaller parts of the eye, because ants have compound eyes, of them all. The more oculi, the bigger the eye, and therefore the better the sight. Thank you guys for watching, and remember to like, subscribe, and comment down the next video I should do next. Well, until then, bye.